Welcome to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast, presented to you by Hetra University. If you've landed here, you're probably passionate about how horses help people. Whether you're an instructor, therapist, in the business, or have experienced equine assisted services yourself, we're glad you're here. Join us as we talk about the benefits, the science, to-dos, how-tos, and all of the reasons why what we do is so much more than just a pony ride. And now, from the Hetra campus in Gretna, Nebraska, here's your host, occupational therapist Katie King.
Hey everyone. I hope you're all in the mood for a great episode because today you are going to learn from the best of the best in the business of equine assisted learning. Now, EAL is the wonderful learning approach that promotes the development of life skills and personal goals through equine assisted activities, typically from the ground. So you're going to hear from Debbie Anderson, the executive director and co-founder of Strides to Success, as well as Blair McKissock, the director of education at Strides to Success. These are wonderful women to talk with. First of all, we laughed and cried during this episode, but they are a wealth of knowledge and have truly spent the last 30-ish years of their careers refining the art of equine assisted learning. And that's not with any one organization or approach either. They really gathered the gold, as they say, from numerous methods to really put together an impactful strategy that they use in their center, Strides to Success. So they are both women called to help people with horses, but they just didn't quite find their home with adaptive riding or therapeutic riding. So they specialize in this type of therapy service, utilizing the horse and facilitating personal growth in others through EAL. Also, spoiler alert, this is part one of a two-part episode. So don't be too mad at me when I leave you hanging just a little bit at the end. Enjoy. Welcome, Blair and Debbie. I'm so glad to have you. I am looking forward to hearing about your program, Strides to Success, and also what you're doing with EAL and EFP and all of those things. But first, I'm going to let the audience meet you guys. So Blair, do you want to start maybe with who you are and your background?
Sure, I don't mind. My name is Dr. Blair McKissock, and I am currently serving as the Director of Education at Strides to Success. And I've been working with Debbie for, quite a long time. I think we've determined somewhere since the early 90s. And so it's been a privilege to really focus that work with Strides to Success over the last 10 years. Oh my God, 15 years. Time goes by way too fast. But I am a CTRI and have been, like I said, since the early 90s. I'm also an ES. And have been through lots of the different trainings and really just have enjoyed being a part of this profession and seeing it grow. I have a background in animal assisted therapy and outdoor adventure ed. That was kind of my background. I'm a rec therapist by trade and did my first kind of foray into animal assisted therapy and dolphin assisted therapy. And when I came home from my internship, there weren't any dolphins for me to continue that work. And I've been a lifelong horse person and found Agape therapeutic riding and Debbie and became a CTRI, or I guess just a riding instructor with NARA shortly after college. So I've been doing it ever since. And currently, most of my work is in equine assisted learning. And my specialty is working with kids with autism and ADHD and trauma. And so I have had the privilege to work with Debbie to co-found HorseWork Education, which we co-founded about 15 years ago. And we've been very actively involved with PATH and being co-chairs of the EAL task force and helping to develop the competencies and guidelines together and to really just nurture and help support the professional development of young professionals who want to become a part of this industry.
Wonderful. It's so important. Hetra has been doing a little bit of some of that kind of mentorship things as well. And I think there's been so many changes, both really for the good for our industry, and helping mentor those through that process is so important. All right, Debbie,
Absolutely.
do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Debbie Anderson. I currently serve as the executive director at Strides to Success. And in that job, anything else that needs to be done on a daily basis. And I started out, I was just looking at our certification papers, Blair, because we're going through accreditation here in several months. And so I'm going through the policies and procedures, and I came upon our papers. And what I noticed was that I was certified in 1995, and my paper was signed by Bill Scaby, who was the first director of then NARA. And in your paper, you got the fancy documentation. I got just the plain little certificate, But at any rate, we've been doing this a long time, and it started out with therapeutic riding. And it was really interesting because the passion that all instructors have to do this work was definitely there. And the thrill of seeing the kiddos with autism, speak their first words and getting kiddos out of the chairs and putting them on the back of a horse. All of that was wonderful. But there was always something, a little urge inside that told me that there was so much more that horses could do, for a broader scope of kids. So not only the kids with disabilities, but in looking at the kids that were flunking out of school, or the kids that were shut down and not involved in the learning process anymore. What about those kids? They didn't necessarily have disabilities, but the urge to serve that population was always instilled in me way back in the 90s. And so there wasn't really a name for that because they really didn't fit in the category of therapeutic riding at that time anyway. And so we kind of went on a search, and that's, as Blair stated, that's kind of when we hooked up. We went on a search for what services would be appropriate, for the most at-risk population and the kiddos that didn't necessarily fit into therapeutic riding. And what we found was there wasn't anything. Well, by golly, if there's not anything currently, then we need to make something. And so I think that's kind of where the journey started with EAL, way back in the 90s. It just didn't have a home. And I know that a lot of other instructors were experiencing the same thing, at that time. And I remember going to conferences and bumping into people and we'd start conversations, and it's like, yeah, we want to work with schools. Yeah, we want to do that. We want to work with mental health agencies, and we want to do this and that. But we don't have a home. We don't know where to go because nobody's really doing that. They have a certification for therapeutic riding, but that's not what we want to do. And we're like, yeah, you're our people. Come on, we'll stick together and shake it out. So that's the mischief that we've been getting into for the last 20 years, I think, is trying to find that home for EAL.
I love that.
Lots
yes.
of mischief.
Well, tell us a little.
So much mischief.
Tell us a little bit about Strides to Success then. And that really is the home that you guys have established then for your EAL activities. Tell us a little bit about Strides to Success.
Well, it was interesting. Blair mentioned that we started at Agape Therapeutic Riding Center, which is a wonderful center, but it was all focused on therapeutic riding. One of the other gals that originally started there was an OT, and she kind of broke off thinking that, there's something here for OTs and PTs to do. And so she broke off and started a center called TheraPlay. And we were kind of like, wow, she did it. We can break off and start our own center and do what we want. We don't have to do the therapeutic riding because Agape does that really, really well. Let's spin off and let's start our own organization and focus on, equine assisted learning and mental health. And so that's what we did. We founded Strides in 2004. And we started on a little property at the Indianapolis airport. It was so simple. It had 6 stalls, and they were more than happy to let a nonprofit come in there and utilize the facilities. So that's where we started. And we had no indoor arena, just a little, outdoor arena and 6 stalls and a lot of deer on the property and a lot of wildlife. And that's where we started. Then we were 2 years down the pike. We were able to move to a facility that now has 22 acres. We got an opportunity to build it. So we designed the building kind of specifically for what we envisioned the work was going to look like.
Yeah, I heard about you guys had built that facility very specifically for the type of work that you do, right?
Right. It's very different. And the difference is there's lots of offices. That's not so different, but they accommodate several different mental health practices. We have 4 independent practices that work out of the barn. And so there's always, clients there coming to see a therapist. It's running 6 days a week from dawn to dusk. And then, but in the back half, it looks just like a regular barn. There's 10 stalls and lots of, paddocks and an outdoor arena. So that's pretty typical. But the indoor arena is very different. It is 70 by 70. And it's very intimate. It's not, you're not going to canter a horse, in that arena. It's not designed for working the horses. What it's designed for is the intimacy that's required when you're doing mental health work or when you're doing EAL. And the populations that you're working with oftentimes need a break or come to a point of frustration, or they come to a point of change and they need a little bit of space to kind of get away from the center of the activity and the energy of the activity. But if you have too much space, they can disconnect, which is what their pattern is usually. And they can disconnect from not only the facilitator or the instructor, but also from the horse. And so we found that rich point of where is that space with the energy in the arena that gives them enough of a break so that they can regather themselves, but it doesn't break that connection. And so that's why we love our space, 70 by 70. There's no windows except for up high. There's no distractions. And so it's just this awesome teaching space.
And there's no observation room, which is also different than, some of the traditional therapeutic riding centers. Debbie always talks about kind of the idea of minimizing distraction. And I think that that's so important. I mean, there's still space, there's a small observation area, but there's no window. It's not separate from the arena. It's more used as like a second classroom space, because we don't want clients to feel like they're in a fishbowl and they're being observed with the work that we do. And so I really appreciate the design of the arena for that. It minimizes distractions. It is very intimate, like you said, Deb. And I also appreciate the fact that it's heated. It's extremely well insulated. So it's wonderful that we can use it year round. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to lie, we're definitely spoiled in that regard. I think the barn atmosphere at Strides, Debbie has created like this amazingly immaculate space. We joke about the fact that we vacuum the aisleway at Strides. So there's like no dust anywhere. It's very clean, and so again, it's designed too for people who don't necessarily have that barn vibe yet. Mm-hmm. We're introducing them to the idea of a barn space. And so, yeah, we set that bar pretty high.
Yeah, that sounds like a great transition, because I know what, sometimes like my barn at home on the ranch, and we don't vacuum the aisleway. So that's a good transition for people that may not be used to that quite yet.
My husband always said, you spend more time cleaning that barn than you clean our house. And it's like, yeah, so. The other thing is that the therapy rooms are designed so that they have entrance into the arena area, so we can multitask. We have a classroom, and it's built so that the traffic flow goes in a big circle. So you can have therapy going on while you can have, an EAL group going on, and it just moves really well.
It does. You can go in and out lots of different places, so that it is. You walk in and it's totally just a different. It's a different space than what you would expect, and I always find that interesting. You drive up thinking it's a barn, and you walk in, you're like, oh, it's different from the moment that you walk in. But I wanted to invite Debbie to talk a little bit about the playground out back, because I think the playground is also what makes it different and special.
The playground came about because we wanted people to be presented with challenges that they had to work through. The challenge is that we never force a horse to do anything. We can make a request and we wait for the answer. And if the answer is, oh, no, thank you, I would not like to walk over that bridge, then the lesson then becomes, well, what does that horse need in order to do that? Well, it needs to trust your leadership. It needs to feel safe. It needs to have confidence. It needs to feel like it's in partnership with you. And of course, that then becomes the basis for the lesson, whether we're in a mental health situation, all of those topics would come up with someone that was dealing with trauma. Or, if we're in an EAL session, those are wonderful life skills. Where do you find your courage? Where is your courage? It's in there. So what is it that we need to do in order to make your courage, come out and feel comfortable in order to get over that bridge? And so the playground has a bridge, it has a car wash, it has 2 giant tires that are set very close for the squeeze type game. We have a teeter-totter, and we have I'm looking at it now, we have a big platform of different levels that the horses can and students can go on. So the playground is unique. There's tons of life skills that are attached to that playground and embedded into the curriculums that we use and teach.
That's incredibly interesting. I love the concept of of courage and leadership. And that can sometimes be abstract, especially for some of our younger population, right? So how do they apply that in other areas and other life skills? And the playground is the perfect place for them to learn that.
Yeah, it really is. And it came about in kind of a unique way. Many of us we grew up with horses and we were very task oriented. You learn to steer the horse, you learn to walk, trot, canter, you learn your diagonals, you learn your leads, you learn, how to make that horse jump or spin or whatever it is that you grew up doing with the horses. But at least it was my experience that the horse was always my best friend, but I really didn't focus on the relationship part of having a horse. I mean, I wanted him to go. I wanted him to do what I wanted to do. And I really didn't listen to his opinion on much of anything. And I'm sorry to say that carried over in my first young years as a equine specialist and a path instructor. I needed that horse to do its job. And so looking at the horse and being very task oriented with that, I was amazed one day when we had a volunteer and we had a relatively new horse, and her instructions were to go out and just be with this horse. All I want you to do is just be with him, expose him to the outdoor arena, maybe take a grooming box and lead him around, see how he leads and that kind of thing. Well, I left her alone and I looked back and checked on her all the time because they say I'm a control freak, but I'm really not. But I did check on her a whole bunch. And I looked out the barn opening and I looked out into the arena and I saw she was in this position. She was kind of bent over a little bit and she had her hands extended in as if she was saying, come here, horse, come here. And the horse had his head down, his ears forward, and he was so engaged with her. And they were honestly having a conversation. The sad part was I didn't know what they were saying. I didn't recognize that body language. I didn't recognize that language. And that particular day, I was jealous of what this volunteer was doing with this horse. And I wanted to know what it was. Well, it was the foundation for natural horsemanship is what it was. And it wasn't any particular brand. They all say the same thing, but this young lady knew the language of horses and I didn't know. And so I made it my mission to find out. Once I found out and learned the language and much more about the relationship of the horses, that's what changed Strides. I really believe that's what we injected into the EAL program. That became the foundation for everything that we do, whether it's mental health work or whether it's equine assisted learning. The relationship and the connection was and is the foundation.
Yeah.
I'm going to piggyback off that just a little bit, because when we talk about training new instructors, and I think there's so many of us, like Deb said, who grew up around horses, we learned something from the horses, right? We had these amazing experiences. We felt, empowered, and that we learned so many skills from being in the barn. And that was what we wanted to share with people. We want to share those lessons and that learning. And I think that the thing that is most interesting is that there are so many levels of depth to this work. And I think that, you can be a really good therapeutic riding instructor or ES or somebody who's doing therapy or vaulting or driving or whatever intervention you happen to use. And you can be really good and really skilled, but there is always more to learn. And there is always a deeper place to take this. And I think what's interesting, Debbie and I were totaling up all of our hours for, another certification because we need one, or another training program. And we were looking at it. And I think that, when you're talking about mentoring new people or you're talking about bringing up new professionals, it's like we want to teach them absolutely everything we know. And we want to be like, we want to share that level of depth that we've learned in those learning moments because we've all had them. Mine was after being a therapeutic riding instructor for a while, and I had moved into an administrative role with another program, and I was working with my own horse. And same thing, I was just trying to get him to jump over a jump on a lunge line. We were just trying to do some task-oriented exercises. And let me tell you, he kept stopping every single time we'd get to the jump, and he'd just stop. And I think we must have done this for like 2 hours, right? And I finally just sat down and I was like so frustrated. And it was this same realization of, you know what? I never really won. What is my intention? What is the reason I need him to jump over this pole? What is it? Why is he saying no? What is it that I am doing with my body language that keeps stopping him? And you understand that there's so much that happens in this transaction between the horse and the human. And there's so much more other than just using the right verbal cue or the right whatever. And I think that it's really hard to impress upon people that are coming into this field that there is a depth of knowledge. And it's so worth it to take the time to really try to dive into it and to figure it out, because there is no shortcut. There is no quick way. You can't have a 2-day training and all of a sudden you are ready to go to share this work with clients. You can share the work of horses, absolutely. But if you really want to provide an authentic experience that takes somebody to a place to where they are open for change and that they're ready to do something with their life, it's like there's so much there and so much richness. And, I've valued so much this relationship that Debbie and I have because she's always been really good at that challenge. What's the intention? What is it that you want to have happen and why? Why is it that you want to choose that horse with that client? Again, I didn't mean to go off on a total tangent, but just talking about that relationship, there's so much more there than I think we give credit to.
You guys do a lot of that professional mentorship, like you're talking about, Blair. And I think what you're saying is exponentially important. But how do you take some of those young professionals and try to teach them those things? Or what resources did you guys use to really start to open your eyes to some more of that and learning the depths of knowledge that comes to horses?
We just laughed because there wasn't anything available when we started.
Yeah, I mean, there was EGALA and there was PATH, and we were both we were both introduced to PATH to therapeutic riding. But the value, we went to EGALA, and what we saw there was extremely creative. It was extremely different, and you could see the outcomes that they were getting. And so we thought, okay, why can't we marry these two things? Why can't we pull in, our safety and our comfort level of safety and still have the creativeness that, we just experienced through EGALA? Well, then we'd go to the next training and we'd say, oh my gosh, why, we'd pick out, the top 10%. I always say that whenever you go to a training, it's probably about 90% of what you're never going to use again, but there's always 10% gold. So we spent 25 years gathering that gold from all different types of trainings. And that's what we wanted to present and that's what we mentor to people. It's not one way or the other, or it's not our way and it's not our branding. It's 25 years of the best, and our mission is to not necessarily certify people in any one area, but to prepare them for anything that can happen in the arena. So we want to fill their toolbox full of wonderful tools, whether they're facilitating a corporate group, whether they're facilitating or supporting a mental health provider, or doing therapy, or working with a school system. And, it's really been interesting because now, there was a group of people that were commissioned to come together, and a project funded by the Bob Woodworth Foundation. And those people were from all different organizations and represented all the different services that horses are involved in. So it was OTs, PTs, mental health therapists, and learning people that were doing equine assisted learning, veterans. All these different people were commissioned to come together and create this paper called The Optimal Terminology for Services that Incorporate Horses to Benefit People. And it's a consensus document. And it was a wonderful project. It's still going on, but we got the paper out, but it took 2.5 years of all of these professionals coming together to identify the different types of services. And I'm happy to say that I got to be a part of that project. And although EAL was happening, and has been happening for many, many years, it now has an official home. It was separated out from therapy. And I know that part of the discussion that you wanted to have is the lines get blurred sometimes, by people doing this work between EAL and therapy. And so what happened in that group is they were very adamant about taking therapy and really wrapping it up so that it was very clear what professionals can do therapy, what therapy is, and what different groups can perform therapy. And so when it came to equine assisted learning, that was very exciting because it was the first time that really all the powers to be, whether it was Lynn Thomas, she was involved in it as a representative from EGALA, and Kathy Alm kind of put the thing together as a representative of PATH. And then there were lots of independent people. But the exciting part for me personally was that it finally clearly identified equine assisted learning as its own service, and separate from therapy. And they gave it definitions, and we were able to clearly say that there's 3 different sections of equine assisted learning. There's equine assisted learning in education, there's equine assisted learning in organizations, and there's equine assisted learning in personal growth. So all the coaches, all the wellness people, all of the school teachers and the educators, have an official place to go. And I'm really excited because Blair and I have been very busy for many years trying to identify the criteria that an equine specialist should, or an equine assisted learning specialist should have, and the competencies. We worked as part of a committee to identify those, and that is now becoming the backbone of a certification that PATH is in process of developing. So woohoo! Equine assisted learning has a home and will have, its own line of services.
Yeah, we were looking back through emails, and it looked like it was like 2011, 2012 when we started working on the EAL manual and developing competencies and guidelines for equine assisted learning. And if anybody's interested in finding those, because the competencies are a really good resource that if people are looking at getting training and they want to know if the training actually covers what they need to know to do EAL, because I mean, there's so many out there now. Again, when we started, there were no training options available. We had to kind of, as things came up, go with them. And the competency document they can find by just Googling PATH EAL competencies, and it'll pop up, and it's a PDF document. And they can use that against the, what the objectives are of a training program to make sure that they're getting what they needed. And it's part of my journey. I did the same thing, went to an EGALA training. And I think that the thing that popped into my head as I'm watching, the interaction they're doing, the training, is a lot of it was experiential ed. And a lot of it was the same types of theories and the same types of things that we learn as facilitators in experiential learning. It's not therapy in experiential education or adventure ed, but it's facilitation. And so, and it was funny because that was around the same time that E3A was beginning to kind of put their stuff together. And so we're all making these connections. And so the competencies are also not only grounded in the horse skills that you need to have, but also the facilitation skills. So again, we finished that document, I think started officially, it took about 2.5, 3 years to put those together. And we were really thoughtful. Nothing that we've spent time putting together is about personal branding. It's not about anything. It's about putting best practices out there and trying to put evidence behind, what we need. And it's really trying to encompass and gather feedback from all of the different types of people that were in that homeless, that were in that homeless category. Yeah. So there's teachers and coaches, pretty much everybody that's not a therapist, right? And CTRIs that wanted to do EAL. And so the competency document is really, really good. And, that we're still working on the development of specific standards, but there aren't a lot of standards either. So the guidelines document really works as a way to put some structure behind how to standardize what you do. So you've got, in the competency document, there's the facilitation skills and horse skills and instructor skills and all of those. And then in the guidelines, it's operating guidelines. So again, same thing. They can, I think, just Google PATH EAL guidelines and that PDF document will come up. And, those are living documents. They'll change again as our understanding changes and the work that was done in the consensus document changes as we, get through the certification work that, and the research. Good gravy. When we started too, you had a really hard time finding any research on EAL or even just any equine assisted work. And that research it's grown so much. And we're able to now pull that research to help support, and define a scope of practice and a scope of work. So anyway, but those two resources are available.
Yes. And for the audience, so you guys know, I will link those documents in our show notes below. So if you guys are interested in those, I'll drop those links there, or you can Google them, like Blair said. But I think I will just echo that the research has really exploded here in the last couple of years. I think part of that too was just developing some terminology. Gosh, I mean, I'm sure when you guys started, I mean, EAL wasn't a thing until, not that long ago, I'm sure. So once we started developing some terminology, then we could all get on the same page with what are we doing and how do we research it and how do we find research on it, right?
Well, and the competencies do a good job too of helping to define that scope of practice. Deb, do you want to kind of speak to some of those differences between the EAL and the therapy? Right.
The differences between the two. And I think, Debbie, you had talked a little bit about how sometimes it does cross the line a little bit into therapy, but, you don't have necessarily a specific credential or anything for that right now, but what are some of the differences or what kind of, I guess, prerequisites should you have before you start doing some EAL?
Ooh, everyone is like, what? Come on. What's the answer to the question about the prerequisites to facilitate EAL activities? Well, you'll have to tune in next week for the answer. That's right. Next Friday, we're going to launch part 2 to this episode. So tune in to hear Blair and Debbie continue the conversation, including where to get started if you want to do some EAL, and a quick and easy way to tell if you are really crossing the line from EAL to EFP or to therapy services. So you'll want to hear it, I promise. See you next week. Thanks for listening to another episode. Until the next one launches, stay connected to our community by joining the Not Just a Pony Ride Facebook group. There, we share exclusive educational content, answer your questions, and review new and exciting developments for the EAS community. Don't forget, if you have suggestions for future episode topics or a lead on a great guest that you think our audience would enjoy, click on the link in the show notes or visit us at hetrauniversity.org. This podcast is presented by Hetra University, an educational arm of the Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy. Hetra University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to our participants and the EAS community. If you'd like to help us work toward our mission, you can make a donation by visiting us online at hetra.org. Again, I can't thank you all enough for helping Hetra change lives one stride at a time.